Music hold ended.
"2020 has proven to be a very active year for natural disasters. From the deadly fires in the Northwest to hurricanes in the South, thousands of people are in need of food and shelter all across the country. COVID-19 safety restrictions are adding an extra layer of stress and causing difficulties for shelters to provide enough room for those in need. Hello, I'm John Jenkinson, and welcome to this edition of Rural America Live with AARP, and to our listeners joining us on Rural Radio on Sirius XM, Channel 147. We have a very little control over things when a disaster strikes, but how we prepare, what we do during a disaster, and how we stay safe after a catastrophic event, it could mean the difference between life or death. Tonight, the American Red Cross, along with the AARP, join us to talk about what role they play when disaster strikes, and they're here to take your calls as well as offer life-saving tips. Our question of the month is, do you have a storm-related story or tip to share, or a lesson learned to share? We're giving away a Yeti cooler to 5 lucky on-air callers. If you're caller 1, 3, 6, 8, or 10, you'll be a winner. The phone lines are open, so give us a call. The phone number is 877-283-7570. You don't need to be a member of AARP or over 50. And as a reminder, you can win only once each calendar year. Join the conversation and give us a call. 877-283-7570. So joining me now from Sioux Falls, South Dakota is AARP Regional Director Sarah Jennings, and we have a special guest from the American Red Cross, Jackie Drake. She's the Regional Communications Officer. Jackie is joining us from Houston, Texas. Ladies, welcome to you both. Glad that you're here with us tonight. And Jackie, I want to start the evening talking about the work that the Red Cross has been doing around recovery efforts in Louisiana, in the Northwest, where the fires are still raging. Talk a little bit about that, please.
So we all know about all of the disasters that have been happening. As you mentioned, I'm actually assigned to Hurricane Laura that's going on. It continues to go on as so many people from Louisiana have been impacted by Hurricane Laura. So we've been on the ground doing a damage assessment with homes and making sure that those people who are still displaced are getting supplies that they need to be able to go home and muck out their homes. We give out rakes and cleaning supplies and buckets and tarps, lots of stuff like that. So that's along the Texas Gulf Coast. Yesterday and today we have been watching for Hurricane Sally. That is the most recent disaster that's touching people along the Texas Gulf Coast. And what we did is we set up shelters before, during, and after the storm. We do this for all types of storms that we know are approaching so that we can be prepared, helping everyone in our communities be prepared. And of course, we know that millions of acres of land have been burned because of the fires that are burning in California, Oregon, and Washington. So right now, the biggest thing that we are doing is in a COVID environment is cover, distance, clean whenever we're working with clients face to face, because we still have to do that. And then some things we're also doing remotely. But there is so much going on. There is so much disaster and so many people are hurting. And the Red Cross is always there in times of need.
Well, and our thoughts and prayers go out to those folks who are dealing with that. Sarah, AARP state offices have been responding to many of these catastrophic events, from the derecho in Iowa and the fires in the Northwest. What can you tell us about what's happening on the ground?
Well, as you said, AARP state offices, we try to be a partner to local agencies like the Red Cross and other emergency management agencies and other nonprofits whenever a disaster strikes. And our teams on the ground in Louisiana, in Oregon, in California, in Iowa, where all of these recent events have hit, do kind of their first job is to help coordinate, try to get the information out to those affected about where they can get help. And then as recovery happens, make sure that, again, people know what's available to them. And another role that we play, and it's something that we've talked about on this show quite a bit, is frauds and scams, because unfortunately, when disaster hits, there's often scammers see that as a huge opportunity. So we also do in addition to helping people try to make sure they can get connected to resources to rebuild their lives, we also try to make sure that as they are rebuilding their lives, they don't fall victim to some of these scams.
Do you have a story or a tip to share or a question? Well, give us a call. The toll-free number is 877-283-7570 and join the conversation. We're going to take a short break, but first, here are some tips on how to prepare before disaster strikes.
Right now, AARP's work is more important than ever. We hear older Americans loud and clear, and that's why we fight for what they and their families need. Access to health care, affordable prescription drugs, opportunities to save for the future, ending age discrimination, a healthy, financially secure, fulfilling life. That's what AARP fights for, because that's what everyone deserves. Join us in fighting for what's right.
A natural disaster may force you to evacuate, and the coronavirus could impact your emergency plans. So take steps now to help your family and community prepare. Keep a supply kit stocked with cloth face coverings, disinfecting supplies, and hand sanitizers. Check with local officials about what shelter spaces will be open during quarantine efforts. And remember to review the CDC's guidelines with the whole family. Disasters won't wait. Neither should you. Visit ready.gov/plan to make a plan today.
Welcome back to Rural America Live with AARP. How do you prepare for disaster? Do you have a tip to share or a question about what to do after you experience a natural disaster? We have the Red Cross on the show tonight. Regional Communications Officer Jackie Drake is here with us, and Sarah Jennings from AARP, and we want you to join the conversation. Call us on the telephone number that's there on your screen. It's 877-283-7570. We have Yeti coolers to give away tonight to 5 lucky on-air callers. If you're caller 1, 3, 6, 8, or 10, you'll be a winner. And we are ready to go to the phones and share your stories or ask a question. 877-283-7570. And let's do just exactly that. Amber joins us this evening. Amber, good evening. Welcome to the program. What's your comment or question tonight?
Hi, my question was, with all these natural disasters in 2020, how do you think they would have been different without the coronavirus?
Jackie, that's a great question.
That is a really good question. So for the Red Cross, one thing that we had to take into account, of course, is the safety of employees and volunteers, because the Red Cross relies on volunteers to carry out the mission. So we did a lot of planning ahead of time. Usually whenever we have big disasters, like we have hurricanes and wildfires, we would do a lot of what we call congregate sheltering, where lots of people are in a big room and they're just sort of there until they can begin to get back home. Well, because of the coronavirus, what we've done is our first plan of action is if someone has to leave their home, instead of putting them in what we call a congregate shelter, we have been putting them in hotel rooms. And that's for the safety of everyone. That's for the safety of clients who come to us seeking shelter. And that's also for the safety of employees and volunteers.
Amber has a great question. By the way, congratulations. You are the winner of a Yeti cooler. So let's go continue to go on to the phones here. Pam from Louisiana. Well, Pam, thank you very much. I know that
congratulations, Amber. And if I could just add, John.
Yes.
I just wanted to add that the other thing that at ARP we're trying to educate people about that is a change in kind of how people have to think about preparing for disaster is what you pack in your preparedness kit. And there's some things now that weren't things we thought about 6 or 8 months ago, things like face masks and other things that you might want to pack more of so that you can avoid some of the places where you might not be able to go, like a grocery store, or make sure that you have a sleeping bag so that you can use your own things so that you aren't using other people's things. So I just wanted to add that there's a lot of great tips and tools out there. And one thing that we are wanting people to think about is, because of the pandemic and maybe how you live your life a little differently right now, that also pertains to your emergency preparedness kit.
Oh, I'm glad that you brought that up. Let's go to Pam in Louisiana. Pam, your state just experienced not too long ago a pretty big disaster.
Yes, we did. We sure did. Laura came real close to this little town that I'm living in, and the lightning split a tree right down the middle, and part of it fell on the electric fence that keeps our cows in, and the whole breaker box out there on the line lit up. It was like an eerie color green. It was horrible.
So what's your comment or question?
Well, I was going to ask about the safest place in the house. We just have one heavy brick wall that divides my living room from the kitchen, a half wall, and I have a heavy couch against it, leaning against it, and that's what I crawl behind when it starts. But I do a whole lot of praying. I do a whole lot of praying, but it is.
Oh, we may have lost her, but Jackie, she brings up a good point. What do you folks recommend? What have you been hearing? What do you see works best?
I'll say, let me just preface this by saying I am not an expert on the safest place in the house to be. But I would say it's probably a room that doesn't have a lot of windows. So whenever I think about things that happen during Hurricane Laura and other tornadoes and things like that, you want to make sure that you're somewhere that if the windows do burst, or if something flies through the window, that you're not in the way of it. So think about like an interior closet, or something along that line where you could try to confine yourself. But that's a really good question, and I'm going to look up that answer because I want to know as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Sarah, I would suspect it probably depends on each individual situation. May be a little bit different, whether you're on higher ground or maybe you're not. Things like that, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, and the type of disaster, because I know here where I'm at, we head to the basement and we go to an internal room for a tornado, but I think that's a great idea that Jackie had to sort of look that up depending on where you live and the type of disaster that you're going to be facing. So, and I'm not an expert either, so I don't want to give bad advice on something that important, but that's something that I'm going to double check too for some of these other disasters as well that I haven't had to experience as much.
Absolutely. Mike is joining us tonight from Iowa, another state that really had a disaster with those terrible winds. Mike, good evening. Welcome to Rural America Live with AARP and the Red Cross. What's your question or comment?
My comment is, I know a lot of people, including myself, have generators for like power outages and stuff when they go out. And I live on the western side of the state. And I currently work for a cooperative that we have quite a vast fleet of fuel trucks that we send over to the east to help supply all the companies with big generators and stuff. And I know we were hauling roughly probably 75,000 to 80,000 gallons of fuel a day. So I would suggest that people try to, I mean, it's hard to prepare for such a disaster, but, you know, it wouldn't hurt to have some extra fuel storage for your generator, not depend on it, because the people that need the fuel the most, as far as like the grain elevators had to get their grain out of there using all the diesel fuel and stuff, or in a separate energy source just to help them get by as far as being prepared.
Mike, that's a good point that I'd not thought about too much either. And by the way, you're a winner of a Yeti cooler. Jackie, I know that the Red Cross, I've seen many of your vehicles. You folks go into these areas. I'm sure that you folks have to plan ahead for fuel, things like that as well.
We do. And I'm thinking about our one of our current disasters that we have right now along the Texas Gulf Coast region. So Hurricane Laura hit the eye, passed over Cameron Parish, over to Calcasieu Parish, and I'm from Calcasieu Parish. So I've grown up living through lots of different hurricanes and tropical storms and things like that. And he's absolutely right. Whenever you have a generator, you always try to plan to have the gas there. And as we station our emergency vehicles that are going into these areas that have been affected, we too make plans to have gasoline, and then knowing where different gas stations are open, we're doing research before we're sending our vehicles over that way so that no one is stranded. But that's a really, really good point that he made.
Mm-hmm. Sarah, anything to add to that?
Only that, some folks would have the generator and be able to stay where they're at if it's safe. But for a lot of people, what it brought up for me was, folks who may have to evacuate for a day or longer. The kind of similar thing to think about is making sure that you take batteries, your chargers, everything that you might need if you're going to be away for a while to keep your various devices happening. And we also really encourage people as part of that disaster preparedness kit to have a battery operated or a crank operated radio, a weather radio of some sort, so that you can make sure that you continue to be able to get those alerts, because that's something that even if you are evacuating, you need to make sure that you have the most up-to-date information as possible, and you may have to be relying on something that's battery powered or crank powered.
Oh, that's right. I want to get into the evacuation part that you just mentioned here, Sarah. But first, I want to give our phone number, 877-283-7570. That's the number to call. Be a part of the family here and visit with us a little bit. Ask any questions that you may have or offer any comments. Jackie, I want to go back to something that Sarah just touched on. What important documents should a person take with them if they know that they're going to have to evacuate?
A lot of times people forget about these really important documents. And even though we talk about this all of the time when we're giving preparation tips, it's so easy to forget because you're always thinking, I'm going to go back home after this. This isn't going to be a big disaster. I'm going to go back home. So a couple of things I want you to remember to bring with you is bring your insurance documents. Grab everything that I'm telling you and put it in a plastic bag that you can seal and bring with you. Put your insurance document, any information that you have that lists all of your valuables at home. I want you to also make a list of your contacts. Anybody that you have in your phone that you talk to on a regular basis, you probably did not remember their phone numbers, you didn't memorize their numbers. Write those numbers down in case you forget to bring your charger, or if your battery goes dead, whatever the case may be, you can have those phone numbers. The other thing I want you to do is to make sure you contact someone who is not having to evacuate. And that's going to be your contact, so that if you get into an area, just like they're experiencing in Louisiana right now, and the cell towers are down, then you have your list, you can always call and tell your contact out of town, hey, I'm safe. So just remember, get a nice plastic bag, put all of those important documents in there. And even if everything else in the bag gets wet, at least your important documents are going to be safe.
Good point. Sarah, we never know when disaster is going to strike. I think that's the disadvantage that we have. Now, sometimes we have a little bit of a lead time, but not all the time. Is it a good idea to always have things like this, like Jackie was just talking about, always ready to go at a moment's notice, no matter where you live, no matter what kind of a disaster may come your way?
It really is. And boy, when Jackie was talking about the phone numbers, that's actually one thing I don't have in ours. And I will write that down, because you're right. If I lost access to my cell phone, I would lose a lot of information for people. But yes, John, we definitely is something that it's better to be prepared. I think that also helps us all if we're dealing with a crisis situation. If we're prepared and can either grab that bag or grab that box, or know that we have stored those information, you can also consider putting all of those valuable information in a password protected electronic place as well that you would have access to anywhere that you are. But yes, you should try to have all this collected so that you're not scrambling to find these various really important things while you're also worried about your own safety or your family's safety. And related to that, we always talk about just having a plan and make sure that you and your family have talked about the plan. You know, how are you going to communicate with each other? What's your evacuation route? Where are you going to meet up if you are not together when this disaster hits? And who's going to grab the kit? Make sure that you have everything in the kit. So as you know, the old saying goes, be prepared. And that is definitely the case with disasters. As you say, you can't always anticipate them, but it's best if you're ready so that the ones you can get out quickly if you need to. And for the ones that come up quicker, you know, I guess there's no harm in having this stuff ready to go.
Jackie, what should older adults include in their emergency plan and have in their emergency bag then?
I've actually been experiencing this with my dad. So he had to evacuate from Lake Charles because of Hurricane Laura. When we heard it was going to be catastrophic, we got him out of there along with other family members. But one thing he did remember to bring is all of his prescriptions, because even though you may wind up running out of some of your prescriptions, you can always get them filled somewhere else. So you want to bring your prescriptions, bring a list of your prescriptions, bring your durable medical equipment, right? Because sometimes we might be on oxygen and say, well, I don't use it all of the time, but you never know if you're going to be away from home for weeks or for months. So make sure you're bringing your durable medical equipment, your list of doctors. If you're going to miss doctor's appointments, or like we've been experiencing here in my home, my dad had to call to get some refills and to get some other medication. So he brought all of his doctor's phone numbers with him.
Sarah, anything to add?
No, I think the only thing that is good to think about before you are heading out with all of those things that Jackie just described is your support network. And we talked about this earlier. If you're alone, making sure that you know who you're going to alert. And again, thinking it through how you're going to. So hopefully if you have a cell phone, that being the first call to let folks know where you're going so that they can keep track. And also when you get to safety, making sure that you're able to alert folks that you're safe. Because we all worry about each other when we know that we're in harm's way. And so you want to make sure that your support system knows where you are, can come support you if you need it, but also knows when you're safe.
Meryl from Pennsylvania joins us tonight here. Meryl, good evening. What's your question or your comment?
Good evening. I live in central Pennsylvania, and of course we live near the Susquehanna River, and it does flood on several occasions, some of them very major. And of course, Red Cross come in and help with disaster aid. And my question was, several of these people we know receive bills for the Red Cross service after the fact. And we'd like to know, is that really truly what happens, or is it a scam?
I am so glad you brought that up. And when this show began, one thing that I heard was beware of a scam. That would be a scam. The Red Cross does not charge anyone for services. So the Red Cross is a nonprofit organization. We are always raising money so that everything that we do is of no cost to the general public. We are setting up before, during, and after disasters. If someone says they got a bill from the Red Cross, they need to contact their local Red Cross chapter and also contact the BBB so that someone can get to the bottom of it. But that is definitely a scam.
Wow, Sarah, isn't it something that you have to be ultra aware in situations like this for scams? That's something that I didn't think about either.
It's just awful. And it's anything from what was just described about a Red Cross bill coming to someone coming to offer to help you clean up, to offering you insurance or some sort of protection in the event that it happens again that isn't really insurance or protection. So you really do have to be on alert. And because scammers, as I said earlier, they see these as opportunities and they come prey on people who are trying to get through a really tough time and may not have their antenna up as much as you normally would for this kind of scam. So I'm glad that one was raised too, because that is just awful to think that someone is getting a bill to pay for the Red Cross services. And so I'm glad we've been able to tell folks that definitely is not something you need to do.
Yeah, that's right. From Pennsylvania, we go to the Lone Star State, and Arnold joins us this evening. Good evening, Arnold. What's your comment or question?
Okay, my comment or question is, okay, I know disasters are happening all over the United States. And what I am worried about is that if one does happen around me, one of the first things to go is the electricity. If electricity goes, the internet goes, all the rest of that stuff goes. So your debit card, your credit card isn't going to be useful to you. Is there an amount of money that you should have on standby to get you out of that area, to get you to where at least you can start using your debit or credit card?
Jackie, you know, that he brings up a good point, because a lot of us don't even carry much cash anymore.
This is true. And cash is one of the items that we list in the items that you should be putting in your emergency bag that you're going to take with you. And that's absolutely true. So what happens, as we've all experienced, is that there's some kind of disaster, the power is out, and then the question becomes, because we've become so used to using our debit or credit cards, it would be best for you to have about a week's worth of money. Think about all of the things that you might need. That would be gas and food and a hotel stay. And then you also want to think about how can you carry this money safely with you. So you could either do cash and or bank checks.
Bank checks. Now that's interesting. Sarah, I'd not thought of that. Are those widely accepted?
Well, I think they are, and we do recommend considering those. But I also, I think that's a comfort level that folks would have to investigate. And cash is probably the more simple way, because for a fact people will accept that. But it's something to look into, and definitely it is something that we recommend, because it is a safer way, because carrying a lot of cash around, especially, when you're going into areas that you may or may not be as familiar with, and you have a lot of stuff with you, and you're just, maybe not as organized as you normally might be. Having a lot of cash might be a little bit of something that you just need to keep an extra eye on, and using traveler's checks, bank checks are something to think about.
The telephone number is 877-283-7570. And Bob from Tennessee grabbed that phone number. He grabbed his phone and he's called in here tonight. Good evening, Bob. What's your question or comment?
Well, I have a question that's if you have heavy equipment available to use during a natural disaster, is there an easy way to coordinate with the Red Cross so that you're not in the way, but yet you can say, here's what I have. Have a bulldozer and chainsaws and things like that if you need to clear roads or something.
Jackie, this goes back to the volunteer thing that you were talking about earlier.
Absolutely. So a lot of times whenever there's a big event, and if you're not a regular everyday volunteer, you could become an event-based volunteer. So you could call your local chapter and talk to them, tell them what you would like to do. A lot of times what happens is during big events, big storms, flooding events, hurricanes, whatever is happening, we have event-based volunteers, and those people can call the local chapter and tell them what they have that can help that situation. Now, sometimes if you say, oh, I have this, this, and this, and then as we have our ERVs, which is an emergency vehicle. You've seen those. They're handing out food after storms. So if they happen to come across trees that are down in the road, and if they know, oh, we have a nice volunteer who said he has some great equipment that we could use, then that's how we get the ball rolling, right? Helping each other try to get to the recovery phase. But that's what you should do. Call your local office and let them know what you have the next time there's some big event that's going on and you'd like to help out, and they'll definitely thank you for it.
Bob, another good question here, and congratulations, you're a winner. Sarah, I feel bad about bringing this up again, but it just occurred to me there when Jackie was talking that this would be another one of those opportunities for somebody that if they wanted to scam. Does that open the door if somebody comes along and says, look, I'll help you, and then, oops, here's a bill? Is that something to be aware of?
Yeah, it certainly is. Now, I think hopefully in this situation where we have great volunteers offering, there'd be some way to signal that it is a volunteer operation and that you won't be charged for it. And I'm sure that's something the Red Cross or local emergency management make sure they're talking about. But you're absolutely right that could be something that someone comes by and says, and they may even offer to do it for free initially, but then come back to you with a bill after the work is done and say, well, it took me longer or it took more gas than I expected. So that is definitely something that people just need to ask questions, and I hate that we are in a time when we have to be a little cynical about someone offering just to help us out, but you do need to be on alert. And just when someone comes to offer, just get as much information as you can to make sure that you're not going to get scammed down the line. So it's a great point. But I think I also think disaster response is a pretty incredible moment in a lot of communities where the community just comes together and you have people offering their services, their equipment, their kitchens, their whatever they can to help. And so for the most part, people are there and offering good services with good intentions, but not always. And it's those ones that are the not always that we got to keep our eyes open for.
Oh, absolutely. And we are we have to say that we are so grateful so many times, especially with these recent disasters. One of the stories that doesn't get told enough is all of the great volunteers and the people that just pour out all kinds of help and love and offerings of trying to help folks. And so, yeah, we don't want to minimize that at all. Let's go to Washington, where John is here with us. Good evening, John. Welcome to the show.
Oh, welcome. People forget that we have all become lazy. We're used to speed dial and stuff like that. So it's my recommendation that people, and I've been doing this for now about 60 years since I was first doing volunteer work, that people have written communications that shows phone numbers, because you've got no speed dial after your cell phone's gone dead, email addresses. Even though the internet is not available, ham radio operators now can send emails via ham radio to other locations. So it's important that, you have all of these documents in writing, so you can refer to them. No electricity means a lot of things go away.
Thank you very much, John. That's a good point. Jackie, something else that kind of dovetails into that, I'd like to get yours and Sarah's thought on this. He mentioned emails and addresses, things like that. But what about, because we'd already mentioned, I used to have phone numbers memorized in my head. But that's when I was a kid. I can't remember what I had for breakfast anymore, and everything's stored in my phone. So if that's dead, if the phone goes dead or we don't have that capability, then how important is it to have some kind of documentation on you that has information about who you've been in contact with, loved ones, family, things like that, all written out?
It is so important. And this goes for everyone. When we are no longer memorizing those phone numbers, which is what happens, and then if our phone goes dead, or if we get ourselves in a situation where, what if you happen to lose your phone? And that happens all of the time. So having everything written down is so important. And this is also what we've been experiencing in my home as well, because my father, when he came, he didn't bring his book with all of his phone numbers written down. So what he had to do was, as he remembered one person's phone number, he would call that person and then say, hey, do you have such and such a phone number, right? But if he had everything written down, it wouldn't have taken him a week to be able to get in touch with all of the people that he wanted to speak to. And this is like his sister, she had to leave, or even his neighbors, because he wanted to call his neighbor who had stayed during the storm to say, do we have power back? Or the trees that were down in around the street, or have they been cut? Have they been moved? So many reasons that we need to make sure we have information so that whenever we do go back home, we know what we're walking into. But absolutely, it's so important to have all of that information written down.
Yeah. Sarah, anything to add to that?
No, it's just really great advice that I'm going to take because, again, like I said, I really haven't written all them down and I need to. So it's great advice that this show is even reminding me more that I need to do. And one other topic we really haven't talked about is pets. I'm a new pet owner. We got a puppy as part of the pandemic. And one thing that I know is a big part of most people's disaster preparedness plan is making sure that you're going to have the documentation for your pets as well as any food and if they're on any medication and that sort of thing too. So that if you're able to hopefully bring your pet with you if you have to evacuate, or if you're in a situation where you're at your home, make sure that you have enough so that pet's going to be okay with you for a while too if you can't get out or get to the store.
Jerry from Missouri joins us now here. Good evening. What's your comment or question?
To say that, I storm chaser, tornado spotter, and I worked around Joplin after the EF5 tornado went through, and now 90% of the homes have got safe rooms in them, and just amazing. No more people got hurt and lost their lives than what they did.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And Jackie, he brings up another good point that we've kind of touched on earlier. It doesn't matter what kind of disaster it is. Some of these come without warning. I mean, it's all got to start somewhere. Sometimes you do have warning, but as in that case with the Joplin tornado, things happen so quick. And I live in Kansas where tornadoes can develop rather quickly, and sometimes you don't have that kind of lead time to be prepared.
Right, absolutely. So, we're always talking about with the Red Cross, when we're talking about preparedness, and this is whenever we know that something big is going to happen. But you can also prepare when you do live in those areas where disasters could happen at any moment, right? So do you have enough canned food or shelf-stable food in the event of some type of event, right? So these are the types of things that we can ask ourselves. If we know that we live in a tornado-prone area, we should follow all of the precautions and be prepared, and because you never know what's going to happen, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. Sarah, what about in South Dakota? Do you folks get very many tornadoes, and how do you prepare?
About a year ago, we had two come right through Sioux Falls here where I live, and they were pretty severe, and it was one of those sort of a miracle that no one was severely injured or killed because there was so much damage, and those did really develop quickly. But here, I think, like many of the area of the country that gets the tornadoes, we all are sort of ready. And the truth is, usually, like with a tornado, you're not going to be, unless you're really trapped within your basement, you're not going to be in your house for long periods of time. You can usually get out. So it's a little bit of a different preparation, I think, than some of the others. But we definitely know where to go. And, the kids in school practice tornado drills here. I think what we're less accustomed to is what hit Iowa early this year, the derecho. And I think I said that correctly, which if anyone's seen those videos, I think we maybe showed a little bit of that. That was just something that no one expected. It came up so quickly. And really the devastation to the crops, to the livestock, all in those areas of Iowa was really pretty amazing. And again, something that we really in this part of the country haven't had to deal with. And so that sort of thing, I think, is a tornado is terrifying, but what the folks of Iowa had to go through was something that really, we didn't anticipate, and it came up pretty quickly, and it was really devastating and terrifying. And, just seeing a lot of that video, I hope I never have to experience something like that.
Yeah, exactly right. Certainly has kept the Red Cross busy this year. Well, we're going to take a short break, and we have another Yeti cooler to give away, so give us a call. A call at the number on your screen, 877-283-7570, and you just might be a winner. We'll be right back.
If you need to go to a shelter due to a natural disaster while the coronavirus is still a threat, always follow local instructions and take these steps to help protect your family. First, take your emergency supply kit with you. When you arrive, observe the CDC's latest guidelines, like wearing cloth face coverings, bringing cleaning supplies and hand sanitizers, and staying 6 feet away from anyone not in your family to reduce the spread of the virus. Disasters won't wait. Neither should you. Visit ready.gov/plan to make a plan today.
When it comes to registering to vote, each state has its own rules and its own deadline. If you've moved, or maybe you haven't voted in several years, you'll want to make sure you're registered to vote well in advance of the election. 40 states now offer online voter registration. You can also register to vote in person. To make it easier, the motor voter law requires all states to let people register to vote at their motor vehicle offices. You may also be able to visit your public library or post office to fill out a registration card. Once you've registered to vote, you should receive a new voter registration card in the mail listing your polling place. If you decide to vote in person on Election Day, that's where you will cast your ballot. You should also check out your state's early voting opportunities and how you can cast an absentee ballot. For more information about how to vote in your state, go to aarp.org/election guides.
And welcome back. I want you to either grab a phone or grab a piece of paper and dial this number, 877-283-7570. That's the easiest and quickest and least expensive way to become a part of this conversation here tonight. We still have a Yeti cooler to give away, so we're going to go straight to the telephones right now. And Marvin from Ohio has dialed that number, and he's here with us tonight. Marvin, thank you very much. What's your comment or question for these lovely ladies?
We have in every county in the United States a civil defense director. And this director has a list of all contracted equipment, construction equipment, emergency triage equipment, and emergency shelters. Everyone should know who their director for their county is. This is all funded by the taxpayers. And I was an elected official at one time, and every fire chief in your area has this list. Anyone involved with an emergency, they can pick up this list, call any contractor with a bulldozer or a front-end loader, and they'll have to furnish that man and operate that equipment on a moment's notice. Then the government comes back and reimburses this contractor for his time. This is part of our national security, and it is also hooked up with Homeland Security now. And it is a good policy to know who your civil defense director is for your county.
Well, and Jackie, I'm sure that you folks work with a lot of civil defense folks all over the United States.
We do. And here in Texas, when I'm hearing him talk about civil defense, it's making me think about our emergency management. We have county judges, we have emergency management here. And every time a disaster is approaching, we do work with our emergency management officials to make sure that whatever they want to happen, we make sure it happens. So they're the ones who tell us, we need you to open a shelter. We're always ready, but we get the go ahead from them. And a couple of other things. So he did mention, things that may fall, debris, things like that after a storm. Some other things to remember, down power lines, there could be just general debris, flood waters. And did you know that 1 foot of water could make your car float, right? So whenever we're thinking about leaving for a disaster, we want to make sure that we're doing that in a timely manner.
Sarah, anything to add?
No, I just think that he shared really great information about a local resource that probably not everybody is aware we all have. So I love these shows when we learn so much from the viewers. And I just, and I wanted to echo what Jackie said about the emergency managers kind of coordinating all of that different response. I know our ARP Louisiana team has been doing daily phone calls with some of the emergency management in some of those towns that are still really impacted. And so, organizations like AARP and others get brought into those different conversations to make sure that all of the resources are available and being offered in the most efficient way possible to those people that were affected. And I wanted to share one other thing that AARP has been doing, and that is when we have these national disasters that affect so many people, we do try to raise money and to make sure that we can get those funds to the organizations that can do the most good on the ground. And so for some folks who haven't been affected by a disaster, there's a way to give through our foundation that, again, we give directly to some local organizations. And that's the place you can go find out a little bit more about that is aarp.org/disaster relief. And I just want to mention that is something that maybe everybody doesn't know that AARP does do when some of these disasters strike.
That's great information. I was not aware of that, so thank you very much for passing that along. Mickey from Tennessee picked up the phone and dialed 877-283-7570 and became a winner of a Yeti cooler. So congratulations, first of all. And second of all, what's your question or comment?
Hey, John. People need to be aware if they've got a pet, especially a pet in the house, they need to have their leash, a couple of days, food supply, and be ready that that animal can be handled, because they're going to have to leave in a hurry, and somebody may have to help handle that dog, cat, whatever. So they need to have things lined up for their pet also.
Jackie, do you, when you folks are out working these disasters, it seems like a lot more folks have pets now. Do you run into that?
You know, a lot of people do have pets, and if someone brings an animal with them, whenever they go to a shelter, there is usually an area that's set aside. It might be a place that's next door, or it might be a veterinary clinic that we've made an agreement with. But we do help families that bring their pets. So if you are going to evacuate, you need to bring your cat or your dog. Make sure that you bring a collar or a leash and their little carrying case, bring their food. If you have their paperwork, bring their paperwork with you. But right, we do come upon these things all of the time, even once the storm is over and we're out in the public and the community and we're seeing, you know, different animals or whatever. Our volunteers may give them food. If the animal looks hungry, they'll, you know, bring them some food. But whenever the Red Cross responds, we're looking out for everyone.
Sarah, that's something that you're going to have to think about now that you have a puppy.
That's right. I am going to make sure that we get all of Milo's stuff packed away so that we can make sure that he's going to be fine if something happens here.
Yep,
it's great advice.
They are all a part of the family. 877-283-7570. Let's go back to Louisiana. Donna's standing by. Hi, Donna. Welcome. What's your comment or question?
Well, the question is here, and of course, under Hurricane Laura that we had, we were totally encompassed in this little area, meaning you live in this little thing in the circle of trees around us. You couldn't get in or out the driveway, down the roads, whatever. The question is, we had no electricity, no cell. If someone gets hurt, what do we do?
Jackie?
So that is a great question. And that also brings me back to my message of preparedness. So whenever elected officials or your city government are saying you should evacuate or you should make plans to evacuate, we should follow all of those guidelines because they're saying that for a reason. And a lot of times, I think people are confused about the Red Cross's role before, during, and after some big catastrophic event. So the Red Cross is known as second responders. So your fire, police, rescue, whoever your rescue team is for that area, they're first responders. So once the first responders rescue people who are left behind after a storm, or they've somehow been impacted and they can't leave their home, or it's so flooded that they have to begin walking. Once the first responders help them get to safety, we make sure there's shelter, there's food, and then there are resources to help those families get back into their home. One thing I want to tell everyone about is our emergency app. So if you download the Red Cross Emergency app, it's going to give you up-to-date information before, during, and after a storm hits. So I would recommend getting the emergency app. It's going to give you information on where shelters are, lots of information as your disasters are happening in your area.
Paul from Ohio, we want to get you in here too. What's your comment or question?
Yes, something that probably most people don't have these days is a landline in their house. If you have a landline, I had the experience a couple of years ago that when I blew through Ohio, that neighbors, their cell phones wouldn't work, and they had landlines, but all they had was cordless phones. The electricity was off for 36 hours. If nothing else, have one phone that you can plug in the wall if you have a landline, and that way you can call friends and family. My young neighbors wanted to call their moms, and they couldn't call their mothers because their cordless phones didn't work with no electricity. And that works the same way with internet phones. They don't work whenever the electricity's off. It all depends on the electricity. Generally, if you have a landline, it'll still work unless it's really a really bad situation.
And Jackie, he points out something here. There's a multitude of things to think about.
Absolutely. So whenever we're thinking about how to be prepared, it has to be a global view, right? It has to be about, think about what you do from the time you wake up until the time you go to bed at night. And then make a list of all of those things and kind of have a checklist, right? If you go to redcross.org, we have several different checklists that you can go through depending on what your situation is. If you just want to prepare for a hurricane, or if you want to be prepared during storm season or spring floods, get yourself a checklist and think about all of the things that you do from the time you get up in the morning until the time you go to bed at night. And a phone is definitely one of them. If you're going to use a cell phone, make sure you have all of the phone numbers and names and email addresses written down. If you're going to have a house phone, same thing, because like what's going on in Louisiana, even the landlines are down, or they have been down for some time, and they're just beginning to come back up. So even the landlines get hit sometimes, depending on how severe the storm is.
Well, we're coming close to the end of the show, and we have a few minutes left. But before we get into our final thoughts, we want to wish Sarah a happy birthday. Your birthday was Saturday. Did you do something fun? Surprise.
You know, this COVID world made it a little different, but I got to tell you, it was wonderful. I had friends and family out in my front lawn like we do now, and a lot of time with my family. So I appreciate that. And yeah, I appreciate the wishes. It was great.
Well, and she is an official AARP. We always appreciate you coming on the show. It's always a joy, and we're glad that you had a good birthday. And with that, Sarah, let's start with you for some of the final thoughts on tonight's show.
Well, switching topics for just a moment, but we have an election coming up, and one thing that's getting a lot of attention in the news, and I think around the kitchen table, or maybe if you're having coffee in a park with friends and family, is, you know, how to vote. And so that's something that AARP is taking very seriously, and so we put together state-specific guides that you can look at to get all the information about the different ways you can cast a vote in your state. That is on a website, so if you're comfortable going to a website, you can go to aarp.org/election guides, and there's all the information there for every single state and the different ways to vote. If you're not somebody who's comfortable going to the internet, I would encourage you to call your county election office and ask them for your options to make sure that you know the various deadlines and know the options, because all of us need to vote, and we need to vote safely this fall.
Well, thank you very much. And again, happy birthday. Jackie, thank you so much. And especially thank you for everything that Red Cross does for us. It's a very important show tonight. We sure appreciate you joining us. And join us October 15th when former Doc Web fraudster Brett Johnson joins us to share insider information on how scammers convince you to turn over your hard-earned money. So be sure and tune in for that show. Be safe. Our thoughts and prayers go out to those folks who have been affected by these disasters. And thank you very much for joining us tonight on Rural America Live with AARP. And from all of us, good night from Rural America's most important network.